Hello, welcome to the stream. I think we're working. If you do come in live, I mean, it's too late if it's not live and this is completely silent. If you come in live and there's a problem, feel free to comment in the chat about that. I have some questions. I have a reasonable number of questions. I think got a couple of people asking stuff on YouTube, and I had a bunch of friends from the Wizardly Duo Discord, which is Andrew's Wizardly Reads and Nico's book reviews, their Discord. Put questions there. So I come up, and what I was thinking, I think I would do like something like this for my 1,000 subs, if that ever comes, which, it's not unrealistic that we'll get there in later this year or something. If it's at exactly, hey, I'm going to assume that's Tony there, but if not, hi Tony and Kate, or hi Tony. But I think I'll do this for my 1,000 subs, as I say, if that happens later in the year. But what I'll do for a stream then is I was thinking read some short stories, maybe have a friend on to talk about stuff. Just something a bit more like that, a bit more prep, a bit more advanced planning, and hopefully quality. But for this time, I thought, well, it's not so much the 800 subs that I have hit that, but 2 years on YouTube, which I think my first video or videos, which were Cranford and Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson, were out, I think, on this day 2 years ago, which was at least something of not quite a lockdown project. I kind of had thought about it either way, and I was making videos for other stuff, doing bits and pieces anyway. But I think I'd been watching YouTube for BookTube for a year or two. I was like, yeah, I could do that, and hey, I had time. It was February 2021. It's for that, I guess. It is a birthday edition. So yeah, as I say, we'll do this for, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes or something. Put any more questions you have, any comments on what my answers are. I think we start with, these are questions, I think, from Nico. First, he asked this and then asked the rest like 3 days later, having forgotten to finish his list of questions. But the first standalone at one point was simply, are you secretly Tom Bombadil? We might as well get the Bombadil related jokes out of the way first. He is a merry fellow, bright blue his jacket, and his boots are yellow. I obviously make lots of arguments for how important he is and his songs are in the context of Lord of the Rings and the themes of the book and the structure of the book and stuff. No, I'm not secretly Tom Bombadil. I don't think Tom Bombadil could disguise himself, could he? Surely. He's only himself. He doesn't need to be anything else. He's the very opposite of Sauron and Melkor, Morgoth, who have to change themselves and have to trick people. He's hello, Wandos himself has come to join the chat. I'll get to that question. I'll do Nico's and I'll come across to that one. Favorite food, animal, coffee, or tea? And coffee or tea. These were from Nico as well. Food, probably ice cream. At one point, I couldn't cope like this now. I think my body has kicked into needing some sort of varied, healthy diet, but I definitely did just eat ice cream for dinner as a student, and things like that. I think now I really like things like yogurt and oranges and pork pies, a variety of things. But yeah, just depending on the particular niche that needs filling, particular problem. Favorite animal? I mean, probably dogs or something. But the only animal we keep now is chickens. We have chickens at our allotment. We have 4 chickens at the moment. We lost a couple over winter. That's fairly normal. We actually had a 5th chicken today because my neighbour's brand new bantam cockerel had decided to hop over the fence and cause trouble. And he was actually not too hard to chase out because he was agile enough that when I herded him, he hopped his way back over. But unclipped chickens, even chickens with clipped wings, let alone ones without clipped wings, are absolute devils for jumping over stuff. So yeah, they are technically my favorite animal because they're the only one I keep in terms of my current life. But for enjoying time with animals, I much prefer dogs or cats. Coffee or tea? Coffee in my Asterix mug. I actually have a bunch of, because I've been reading them with the kids, I do actually have a bunch of Asterix graphic novels or bande dessin here, right next to me. You may often see this Asterix mug, as this is my signature mug. Yeah, Asterix is all right. He's not my favourite of that type, but he's pretty good. What are some classic books you'd recommend people pick up? Some more classic books. I think, because Tony later asked something about classics too. Classics can mean obviously pre-20th century or pre-World War II, or it can just mean like, oh, classic fantasy, classic sci-fi. I think in terms of just classics in general, there are things like you kind of, if you really want to get the feel of what English literature is doing, how it develops into more or less the kind of novels we have now, absolutely pivotal authors are people like Austen and Dickens, obviously. And I think if you want to look at classic fantasy and sci-fi, say one classic fantasy option, one thing to buy would be, I think, more than Conan, Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, because I think there's a clearer through line now from Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser to a lot of modern fantasy than there is from Conan. That's not a quality distinction. I think they're two of the best ever. And if I could chat with any author, alive or dead, oh, well, classic sci-fi. If it's not Lovecraft, let's say it's Arthur Miller, Canticle for Leibowitz. If you could chat with any author, alive or dead, who would it be? And then I'll move on to Fëanor's question from the chat. If I could chat with any author, alive or dead, who would it be? I don't think about this in a way, because I don't really massively think, this author, some people are like, oh, this author could be my friend, or they really understand things. And I get that, but I don't really think like that. But in terms of just interesting people, some sense from kind of reading about an author they might be particularly interesting to talk to, I think C.S. Lewis was a very jolly fellow. If you want a real life model for someone like Tom Bombadil, it'd be Lewis. I think Gene Wolfe, I think, would be fascinating. People think he's a very nice guy, very warm guy, very interesting, intellectually challenging. I feel like living authors, Lois McMaster Bujold, I don't know, she's very nice in her Goodreads posts. Is that a qualification for being a good conversation partner? But she's written so much that I value that it'd be interesting because she's alive. Because you can imagine if I was a big channel, I'd be sending her a message and be like, hey, please come and do a chat with me. Talking about the way in which maybe things like theology and technology, society, how they feed into like amazing speculative fiction. It's very different from lots of stuff people talk about. And get up this one from, is it there? Are we behaving? Here's one thing about StreamYard, is that you try to, on a bad day, you try to get anything to click or do stuff, and it's just like, no, not today. Yeah, good question, Fëanor. And I think it's an interesting point. Specifically, you don't mean favorite author, you mean favorite American author. Maybe is that because maybe the presumption is I'd say Tolkien for favorite author, or is it just about, because it simply is the case that most fiction I read is it's Anglophone, it was originally written in English, and therefore it's British or American. There must be a reasonable number of Canadian, Australian, and maybe New Zealand writers I've read. Tolkien, of course, technically, I think, born in South Africa. but not many of those come to mind as like, yeah, this is my top author. But excluding British authors, and excluding any other kind of random internationals, American authors, I mean, Woolf and Bujold, probably. In terms of who I'm most likely to pick up a book and read, that has to be the way you qualify it, right? Because I'm not so sure about, like, is Howard one of my favorite American author is Lieber, because I have such respect and love for that early key fantasy Lovecraft. I mean, yeah, I don't know about that. In terms of who I'm most likely to buy a book or read a book from, it's who's American, Lewis McMaster Bujold, who is the record number of, is it equal record number of wins for in the Hugos or something like that, or second most nominations, something like that. But yeah, of the Vorkosigan saga, which is sci-fi, and the World of Five Gods, which is fantasy. Mostly nowadays she writes World of Five Gods, though she has written in the last 10 years, she has written a couple of Vorkosigan novels. I'm trying to get through both some Vorkosigan and some World of Five Gods stuff this year, because I didn't read loads of her last year comparatively. She's very easy to read. She is, you know how an author can transcend a subgenre in a way that no one ever refers to them as part of that subgenre. No one says Susanna Clarke was or is, sorry, a oh yeah, she's a fairy fantasy writer because of that Jonathan Strange book. And for her, it's more because she's identified within litfic. But with Bujold, having read things like Andre Norton and McCaffrey, very recently Mercedes Lackey is the most relevant comparison, Lindsay Buroker, you see a variety of people identified somewhere within or around romantic fantasy. And some of them are just romantic fantasy, like Buroker and Lackey, they're just romantic fantasy. Andre Norton, evidently seen as a mentor, particularly to someone like Mercedes Lackey, so seen in that tradition. CJ Cherry in the same circle, I don't think really ever seen as romantic fantasy or sci-fi. But you have Anne McCaffrey and Lewis McMaster Bujold, who do write, by any normal account, in terms of themes, in terms of types of story, in terms of structures, what's important to characters, what you could call romantic sci-fi or fantasy. I don't mean it's all about romance. I mean, there are particular devices and tropes. And so she's writing basically the same kind of stuff in that sense as Mercedes Lackey. But the quality is so transcendent of that no one thinks, and that's not to criticize Lackey, but no one thinks, oh yes, she's in this subgenre. It's just, oh, okay, she's one of the most successful in terms of nominations and awards authors ever. And Woolf, well, I mean, Woolf is similar in that, partly because he never siloed himself, he just wrote all kinds of manner of nonsense, from epic fantasy to, or heroic fantasy at least, to Dying Earth sci-fi, to fairly straight sci-fi, to mystery novels in a Nancy Drew style, to other weird stuff as well, and lots of short stories too. Woolf was very adaptable, and Woolf is the opposite. He's easy to read in terms of his prose is very easy to read, but he's the opposite to Bujold in terms of Bujold is approachable and engaging and friendly, and Woolf is demanding. Woolf is like, you gotta make an effort to keep up. He trusts you can. He believes in the reader. Is a very significant thing, is that he just thinks his readers are clever and they can read stuff and they'll be able to do well and they shouldn't worry about it. He believes in them. But he plays a lot with complex, difficult narrators who you can't really trust, in the sense that they don't always know themselves what's happened, or they can't explain, or they're feeling embarrassed. Not that they're all lying constantly. There's a big Woolfian community argument about whether or not Woolf writes basically entirely crazy, evil narrators all the time, or only sometimes. Of those, my favourite books I've read by them, if you want a recommendation, would be for Bujold. I think I would recommend starting with Curse of Chalion, or probably with probably The Warrior's Apprentice and the Vor Game, Shards of Honor, and Barrayar. Barrayar is great, but Shards of Honor definitely feels like the first novel she wrote to publication, even though it's a good book. Warrior's Apprentice is maybe slightly better, and I think Wargame has it over Barrier. And I think you want to read one of they're omnibuses now, but you want to read one of those two omnibuses to start out in the world of the Volkosgan saga, and Curse of Shalion, probably more than Penric for What of Five Gods. And for Wolf, I'd say Fifth Head of Cerberus, or I'm not sure if something like Pandora by Holly Hollander is actually the place to start. It's the easiest book of his I've read in some respects, but that does not mean it's easy. And you can get a lot of complexity and conflict and controversy over what's going on in it. And it might pass you by a bit because it just reads like a very breezy, fun murder mystery. Anyway, hopefully that answers questions. These are from Andrew, I think. Andrew from Andrew's Wizardry Reads. Favorite part of the Silmarillion? Tell Andrew to read the Silmarillion. I think he did read Lord of the Rings recently. My favorite part of the Silmarillion is probably it's the thing that sticks most to my mind is Húrin performing a rear guard at this disastrous battle, the Nerneath and Odiad, and performing a rear guard, and all the other guys in the rear guard are dead, and then he is alone slaying the troll bodyguard of Gothmog, the general of Angband, and with every strike he shouts, Aure Enteluva, they will come again. There's something, there's an issue of character there, and I think a profound truth there as well, to do with the fact that evil is not permanent or victorious. Next, still from Andrew, the next several are, is favourite non-Middle-earth Tolkien work. It's a good question because Tolkien did write several short stories and things like that. And he also did translations like Gawain and the Green Knight, which I think Tony from An Erudite Adventure has. He certainly read. I think you reviewed as well, did you, Tony? He really liked the Kalevala. I don't know if he did a translation of the Kalevala. He certainly did some other Saxon and other works and Middle English work translations, so Orfeo, Pearl. And I think I need to reread the Leaf by Niggle collection, but the short stories that include Leaf by Niggle are good, and I think I particularly liked Farmer Giles of Ham. If you like the Susanna Clarke type, or Stardust, or Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, if that's the kind of jam you're into for fantasy, basically fairy fantasy, I'll see what I mean, I would recommend that, and I particularly recommend I think it's Farmer Giles of Ham is the one I'm thinking of. It might be in that collection, but a couple of those are very good. Your favourite historical fiction recommendation? I like historical fiction. Historical fiction, of course, not being, I assume here, not meaning fiction written a long time ago, but fiction about a historical period. And I do sometimes review stuff like that here. I've reviewed The White Company and Waverley, actually. Both of those are technically historical fiction. In terms they are intentionally set at least sometime, in one case, hundreds of years before the author's own time, in a particular historical period. I'm reading Master and Commander at the moment by Patrick O'Brien, and I suspect that might become one of my favourite historical fiction books ever, and maybe my favourite. I really enjoy, I have enjoyed Sharp and Starbuck by Bernard Cornwell. I never read the Last Kingdom stuff, the Saxon stuff. I did read Stonehenge by him, and I remember nothing about it because I was about 12 or something, 13. But I don't, rereading some Sharp. I've got a Sharp book I've read a bit of, and I might read the rest of soon. I think that my tastes have developed or shifted a bit, but I still enjoy it. I like my friend Abby's historical fiction books, the second of which has just come out, Oh Dear Maria and Oh Dear Maria 2. It's going to be like a 3-part book, basically, made up of 3 separate volumes. I think that's actually really successful historical fiction. But I think, preemptively, I'm going to say Master and Commander because the vision and quality and atmosphere is so strong, that, and you can tell it's going to be exciting. You can tell that he can write, and there's loads of them as well. He did write like 20 Aubrey Maturin books, they're called, because the 2 main characters, Jack Aubrey, Stephen Maturin. There was a film of it, a very famous film with Russell Crowe, based on 3 of them, I think. Paul Bettany as well, maybe, which I haven't seen and I really want to see now. Some talk about like a reboot or a restart. I mean, absolutely. From what I'm reading, I'd watch a well-made series of it. You kind of fear now that the same kind of slightly freewheeling auteur film would be harder to make. You think in a studio system which has very set kind of directives and values, but maybe. What's one book you want to talk more about? We're definitely past 10 minutes here, aren't we? What's one book you want to talk more about? Virtually all the books that I read, I could talk more about. I think I could definitely talk more about most Gene Wolfe books because they're like weird little puzzle boxes. Favorite subgenre? I don't know. I read a lot of what it might be considered romantic fantasy, or romantic sci-fi, which might be surprising. But because I read so much Bujold, and I also really respect McCaffrey, and I have read a bunch of, other people, Lackey recently, and I will read more of her. But that's not my favorite subgenre, and I would never think about being like, I need to buy more things like this. I don't know if I really subgenre like that. Not to be too unique snowflake about it, but I think I sort of just pick up more or less random books that sound good. And they don't massively fit stuff. I don't, for instance, read loads of epic fantasy comparatively. I don't read loads of stuff like Lord of the Rings, or if you want to count it as epic fantasy, Song of Ice and Fire, which I do like. I guess Stormlight Archive. Epic fantasy probably is up there, but I also haven't read an epic fantasy book aside from Night by Gene Wolfe, which maybe isn't super epic for some time. What's something that surprised you as part of the BookTube journey? BookTube questions are interesting because I both think about what I'm doing, what videos might be interesting for my audience, how I can build the natural audience I have, because I build very much organically. So I do think about that quite a lot, in some senses. But I don't know if I've reflected sufficiently upon it to know what the kind of crazy favourite or interesting or biggest bits are. Tony says the film Martian Commander is good. So yes, if you have not seen, you should watch it. I think there are things like at first surprised you. I think at first this isn't surprising, but there's definitely a lot of imposter syndrome, or was for me at first, where you're not sure if what you're doing is worth doing in terms of the reaction it gets, because it starts so slowly, and you kind of get, especially because you'll be like, no one watched this, or this wasn't successful. I think I got over that fairly quickly, mostly because I've always decided to just make videos very quickly without very much quality control checking, just get it out there. And I think I've also definitely thought that the main thing is to be productive, is to be like, I'm here, I'm consistent. And so in that case, worrying about whether or not it's perfect has to go out the window. But I think I had to get over that. I think the favorite part, or no, most surprising part of the BookTube journey, I think once I found Discords, because basically I was like, so there's these kind of couple of Reddit subreddits which aren't super active. There are book community subreddits and Facebook groups, but they're not really something where you're interacting heavily with video. And I think once I found the Discords where you have communities of people who are using BookTube as a thing to kind of talk about, this person said this, and who make videos themselves, I think it was a surprise that there was real vibrancy there, and I definitely recommend some of those Discords. I have my own very small one for my book group. Andrew and Nico, go to their channels, and they have one that I'm active on. Hemvar Liam has one who I've made videos with in the past, and other people do too. And I think maybe it's not surprising, but certainly I said this in my post about this, is that the interaction is the most interesting thing, because there's no money in it beyond a very small number of Ko-fi tips, which functionally go towards paying for the equipment I have or want to get. So there's no kind of like, there's currently a real commercial upside. It's very marginal to say the least. And there's not like a massive ego trip from like a very small number of people wanting to say, hey, That's what I think about books, or thanks for the video is nice. But so mostly it's the interaction, the fact that you get people saying, have you read this? Or I thought this about this, or this is my theory about this, or I hated this. Like, I think also a small number of people who pop up being like, why is your audio so bad? And all I can say is, when you give me money, it will be better. Until then, you can stop whinging. But I mostly, I think that's maybe the most surprising or interesting thing, is realizing that this interaction would be one of the more interesting, fun things. Favorite video of the last 2 years? I don't know. You tell me. Tell me in the comments or whatever what you favorite I've ever made is. I enjoy Portal to Fantasy videos with Abby, but that's because it's just talking books about my friend. We might be recording one next week. Yeah, thanks, Lord Lawless. You are welcome to come and enjoy it with us. I'm only celebrating with, as I said, with coffee. And what other video? I think maybe without knowing what they are, my favorite videos functionally will be ones which are like, I got to talk to lots of people about them. And who would I love to collab with on BookTube? I guess that I haven't. I don't. I did think about this. I actually, Andrew, who asked this, Andrew and I have never done something together, though we talk a lot about books. We don't share all the same tastes, which I guess if we were like, man, we're just reading this one book together, we'd probably have made a video. But I'd do one with Andrew or someone like Nico. Who else do I talk to regularly? Because I don't know, of course you could say, man, there's this big channel I like, but I guess I don't really think, man, I wish I could collaborate with that. I mostly, as much as it would be cool to with whatever big channel it is, I think I mostly think of people I'm actually talking to about stuff. So yeah, there's a channel called Bookends and Biscuits, which is quite fun. I don't know if I'd actually have anything to talk to about with her. She sometimes come into my videos. Hello, if you see this one. But yes, Tony is saying my Bombadil channel is a great one. Is that do I have a playlist, or is it just the general Tolkien playlist? I have, yeah. I like my Bombadil ones. In terms of, one thing is, have I made a video that is worth making? Because I feel like that's one thing I've narrowed down on, is being like, I feel like this is worth talking about. This book is worth talking about. Yeah, always. If I read it, it's probably worth a review, even if it's bad. But if it's a theme video, like a discussion video, it needs to be something which gets me going and I care about. And I think the stuff I've done on Lord of the Rings, themes, poetry, Bombadil, things like that, and probably the Silmarillion chats, as much as they are like very long, and I don't think, they're not going to ever get a wide viewership. I think those ones are probably worthwhile. And so in that sense, yeah, I don't know if they're my favorite, but they are. Jane asked a couple of questions. She asked, what TV am I currently watching? So my switch off TV right now is, of all things, because it's on Disney Plus, it's New Girl, which is, I've got to the point somewhere in season 2 where I'm like, I'm not sure that for all the strengths of the show that this is actually very good, which is, I know maybe if you hate it, you'll be like, yeah, it's not very good. But I like basically moderately charming and easygoing sitcoms. Just switch my brain off to How I Met Your Mother is the best of that genre, because it's actually quite clever and creative. But yeah, so in terms of more serious stuff, I've got, my wife and I have stalled, but we've been doing some watch-throughs and some interesting stuff like Treme. We're watching Cowboy Bebop. Deep Space Nine rewatch for me. First watch for her. Deep Space Nine is my favorite Star Trek. It is the correct answer to what is the best Star Trek. Though I think you can see an arc from DS9 in terms of continuous storytelling and wider plots, which has led to what I think is a massive degeneration in more recent Star Trek series. I don't think they actually learned the lessons from DS9, but I think you can see the kind of like the switch in general from prestige TV going to 10 episodes or 15 episodes, and those episodes are incredibly dark, gloomy, and dramatic. You can actually see Deep Space Nine as an inflection point towards that, even though it's, I think, very, very good, as in it's just an amazing series. Most gifted book I've given to people. I think in terms of fiction, it's going to have to be Narnia or something, because people like Narnia, and I want to give them a good book. It's a book I've given to lots of kids, the Narniad. I don't know if I've ever really gifted many other fiction books to anyone ever. Maybe I should. Maybe that's really tight of me. I have done giveaways, giving away books, getting people to read Fritz Leiber and things like that. Hey, Will, good to hear from you. Will is my friend who I'm going to claim you still live in the Antarctic. He doesn't. I tell my son I've got a friend who once lived in the Antarctic, and that is Will. Thanks for my anniversary. Good wishes. Why did I start my channel? Why did I start my channel? I think I mentioned briefly earlier, basically, you could call it lockdown madness. It wasn't quite, because I realized I'd made some videos for some other purposes, and I was like, yeah, this is kind of fun. And then I think I decided that I was watching BookTube to pass the time. And I think I was just like, yeah, I could do that. Not to insult people who make a lot more effort at their BookTube channels and are good at them, but the degree to which I'm like, I've got opinions. I could tell people what to think about things. Came naturally, you know. Did I do any preparation or planning? No, not really. I think I kind of thought about it for a bit, and then I just made a couple of videos, and I'm a worse webcam and mic than I have now. And as I already adverted to, you can sometimes read the comments, and people do not like the webcam and mic I use now because they're cheap, but even cheaper somehow. And I was like, yeah, I made 2 videos and just put them up on a channel. And the picture for the channel was a pile of books I liked on my armchair, this armchair. And yeah, follow-up question from Will. I'll answer it whilst you're with us, Will. I haven't, no. Like, it's a weird thing with the Orville is I think I was initially turned off in terms of, obviously, aside from issues of being able to find it and watch it. I think I was a bit like, so it's a comedy Star Trek. I haven't watched Lower Decks. I feel vindicated in that, actually, from anything anyone sensible ever says about it. But I think I was like, oh, I don't know, like, do I want to watch comedy Trek? And then what I actually hear is, oh no, the Orville is kind of like actual Trek. It's a spiritual successor to Star Trek, albeit with this sort of comic format. So, I mean, make your case. I'd like to hear whether it's worth chasing and going for. I feel like it's on some streaming service I don't know. I'd need to check. But I'm kind of tentatively with the fear that I don't want, like, a bit like how the Star Wars sequels are like weird satires, particularly, I mean, The Last Jedi is pretty much explicitly a weird satire of stuff that happens in the other films. I don't massively want to kind of walk into like a work that is somewhat spitting on what I care about, but I'm willing to take a bit of a genre bend. So yeah, make your case in comments, anyone who likes or hates the Orville. Got some questions now. I think these are from Perometer, aren't they? From Perometer, who is part of my book group. She's insanely productive at reading in a way that I assume means she's time traveling in terms of the number of pages she can get through a day. If you had to take 3 books with you from a library to a desert island, what would they be and why? Series count as 1 book. This is Desert Island Discs, isn't it? But for books. Assuming the normal rules for Desert Island Discs, I get, which is Bible and Shakespeare, isn't it? I would take Lord of the Rings. I would take. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because what if it's, you know, this is the classic How to Survive on a Desert Island. Do I need that book? Let's assume it's fiction. Lord of the Rings, obviously. And maybe Legend or the Draenei books, because I think I'd want. But then there's a crossover with Lord of the Rings, and I feel like maybe Lord of the Rings would be good enough for that purpose. Maybe some Discworld books then, as a quite different fantasy. And then the third, I guess it'd be tempting to go for a Jane Austen book. It'd be tempting to go for the Book of the New Sun or the Book of the Long Sun by Gene Wolfe. Well, certainly there's enough there in those books to kind of keep me ticking over and thinking, do an annual reread on the island, and I'd probably have a lot of thoughts by the time I got off the island. It's a tough one, and particularly because of the kind of efficiency of going for a series over just one like 400 or 600 page book. Oh man, I could get like a 1,600 page series. So in that sense, maybe it's easier to go for the whole solar cycle by Gene Wolfe. That is, yeah. Maybe the cheat I'll go for. One thing also, because Wolfe transcends genre fiction, it is sci-fi in that case, but it is so much more sci-fi. Yeah, so I feel like maybe I read that too well. That like Orville season 1 is, oh yeah, this is a comedy sci-fi, ha ha. But it kind of moves over. Yeah, of course, some Trek always, and this sometimes is a tension, not so much in DS9, which aside from in its worst Ferengi episodes, keeps sometimes has a light-hearted tone, but tends to mix its tones quite well. But it's the thing TNG struggles with, actually, is that sometimes it's very funny, but more often it doesn't know whether to stay sober and serious or light-hearted. But I mean, if that's the jam, if that's the kind of feel of it, then maybe that's, I can live with that. I guess knowing that I've got to get through a few episodes of maybe this, I'm not sure what this is doing, will help. If anyone does have views on Lower Decks, if you want to make a defense of it, I don't think I need an attack on it. I think I've read enough, but yeah, go for it. Yeah, Will would like to reassure everyone he is not currently in the Antarctic. You cannot go and find him there. It is, yeah, he has great hiking photos. That's not like a reason to stalk him, but if you want to, as a fan of Westerns, looking at, I know like really a lot of the set stuff is a lot of the on famous, not Monument Valley, I guess, but other places is Monument Valley, California, or is it Arizona? But yeah, a lot of the stuff you see in Westerns is in California. At the same time, like I think archetypally, you've got a lot of parts of southern Utah and Arizona and southwestern Colorado, which are really what you think of when you think of Western films. So for me, in a way, maybe just Will's great photos are reminding me of all the Westerns I like. What is my favourite play by Shakespeare? Which one do you want to read most if you haven't yet? This is also from Barometer. I really like Shakespeare. I think I probably bounce around in terms of exactly what I like. And more recently, I've liked maybe Much Ado About Nothing the most. I think it is effective and sweet. I think it turns on a classically intentionally silly like twist of how they resolve things. Understanding that in Shakespeare, there's a certain kind of dramatic device or types of dramatic devices which he's not so stupid as to think are just easily convincing. He's not like, man, people watch Romeo and Juliet and it's so convincing that she's dead. I can completely see why he falls for it. I think it's to be understood that these things are meant to be high moments of dramatic artifice where you're just like, why is this insane thing happening? Well, because it's the movies, it's movie magic. And I think Much Ado has a bit of that, but it's also very funny and it's very dramatic and it has some incredibly powerful moments that are emotionally powerful as well as funny. I think I've always liked Richard II, Macbeth. I've seen a few versions of Henry IV. The Hollow Crown versions are very good by the BBC. The RSC's versions in their kind of, you can get them on DVD from like 2017 or whatever, they are very good. I haven't watched the BBC versions of those ones, I don't think, though I have watched the classic BBC versions of many of these plays. I like Romeo and Juliet, actually, as well. In terms of what I haven't watched, haven't read, or haven't completed, I don't think I've ever completed Coriolanus. I feel like I should. A couple of the lighter comedies I've neither seen nor read, at least in my memory. I've watched quite a lot of the comedies, and I like a lot of them. I think there's a lot of intelligence in fairly forgettable comedies in terms of No One's Like Man. Even As You Like It, which is moderately popular, no one's like, wow, that's absolutely top tier. But I think there's lots of those that are quite nice. But I think some of the comedies that I don't really know, Measure for Measure, possibly. Maybe have I watched Measure for Measure? But yeah, something like that. I think some of the minor comedies, maybe Coriolanus. And what do you value most in a book? Rank in order of importance: plot, character work, writing style, themes, world building. I don't know. I don't know if I can do that, because I don't really give to those. Plot, character work, writing style, themes, and world building. Maybe what I could say better, and this is my cop out. Maybe I'll try to answer this question, but first is that different authors do different things. Okay, for themes, Woolf has to be my favorite at some level, or maybe Tolkien, because by themes I mean things where an author is doing big, clever, interesting things, talking about interesting things, and you've got to kind of work through the book to understand those things. And I think that's stuff that Woolf, Tolkien, and a few others are. Some like Bujold is very good at too. Maybe theme then, given those my favorite authors really in sci-fi fantasy. Maybe that's my biggest style. I think as I've thought of the last couple of Brandon Sanderson books and his strengths and weaknesses quite a lot, I'm reading Tress of the Emerald Sea at the moment, is that his writing style, strength and weaknesses, it's very flat, it's very simple, he's very efficient. And I don't necessarily need someone to be amazing at purple prose to make me really get into like that author. I like Sanderson, for instance. His structure, if we're going to talk about structure, plot, I guess he's strong at that. But I think authors who are good at writing, Tolkien is one of the best stylists that is widely read today. It's actually something I find outrageous, genuinely ridiculous, that a criticism is like, look, I know he's hard to read. I find him hard to read too, but he's so worth reading. Something you occasionally hear. I've heard from fairly big booktubers, and I cannot comprehend that. And I say that because it's something where, based on all kinds of normal measures of style, as well as just the actual audio effect and rhythm and stuff, he's so good at writing. And in that case, it really does matter that he's a good writer. And I think a reason he lasts so well is that he's such a good writer. Writing style, beyond that, some people like Sanderson are fairly easy to get into. Bujold has quite a nice writing style, but she's very approachable. I think Carrick, your best club, like obviously Joe Abercrombie is very good. I'm not one of his biggest fans, but I do like his books. I've only read the first Lord trilogy, but I liked those. He knows how to do rounded characters. I think Gene Wolfe again and Bujold again are both very strong at characters. So I don't know how far that probably is important to me. But then surely the best writers are those who are best at the most of these. World building, Sanderson is great at world building. It is a genuinely impressive thing. And in his best books, he gets that world building across organically. And that's the dream nexus, isn't it? Where the author is not wasting your time by telling you a bunch of stuff so that you know it for later. They're getting you to engage with it diegetically through, and he does it with epigraphs and illustrations. Is a classic thing for him. Wolfe is very good at world building. Bujold's very good at world building. Tolkien is obviously very good at world building. I think someone who's underrated at world building because people misunderstand perhaps what world building is, in the sense that misunderstand is maybe harsh. What I mean is people think world building is, I really like how George R.R. Martin or Brandon Sanderson or whoever else has built this world. J.R.R. Tolkien has built this super detailed world, and I love that the world feels real and every corner is lived in. But world building also just means that there is a coherent worldview and system underneath it. And I think actually C.S. Lewis is much better at that than people think. Look at my video about the Narnia planet Narnia theory. on that one, because I think there is, once you realize there is this wider web of meaning, you begin to see it even more. It's there. That's why they're so compelling books, such compelling books, despite being weird kids' books. They're also very compelling. And I think when you come back and again to them, especially once you get a bit of enlightenment. But I think that's even truer in, say, That Hideous Strength, which is a book which feels like it has a very real world. The world, it's our world, but it's this weird, demon-infested version of it in some ways. In terms of the particular story, I mean, where the macrobes are on the up. And I think the sense of reality and closeness there is very good. Lewis could do more. It's just he wasn't this is a whole incredible detailed world kind of guy. And I think that excludes him from many people's considerations. I do think Woolf is probably underrated by some people because he's seen as like a weird writer. Like, oh, he writes these crazy books that are like, maybe the author's insane. Whereas actually, Night, one thing I thought about reading Night is how real the world in Night feels and how inhabited, even though it's very strange and baffling as well. And a very minor work by his, like Pandora by Holly Hollander, definitely gets the feel of his own Illinois background really right. So Wolf as well. And then the other was, plot. What does plot mean? Does it mean just the story? I like the story in this book. I'm not sure it does. I think it must mean something like structure and plotting. And Sanderson is one of the great moderns, at least at that, because most of the time, I think he's struggled the last couple of books to completely hang everything together. But there was a bit between, let's say, Mistborn through to Words of Radiance or Oathbringer, where probably none of his books were bad at that. They were all, well, not bad. None of them were mediocre. They were all good at that. I think in terms of other great plotters, I do think Tolkien is very efficient with story and gets a lot across. I do think the opposite of this, of course, is Joe Abercrombie, who just writes very long books which have very little story in them, and that's kind of okay. But I liked Larry Correa's Son of the Black Sword for sort of a sense of building tension and rhythm recently. I think, Robert Howard has to be up there, surely. At his best, Howard and Burroughs, Edgar Rice Burroughs, have a kind of continuous pulp-like rhythm where just stuff is happening and you're being moved on. And I think Howard is probably better than Burroughs for that. Burroughs, in a sense, is almost a cliche of pulp. He is himself just what pulp pacing is, and that's not wholly a good thing. Whereas Howard is, at his best, very organic in his pacing. And it feels like, okay, it's crazy pace, but it works, it's natural. And then I've got a last couple of questions from other friends. Who is writing the most exciting stuff in role-playing games right now? That's an interesting question. I don't read enough of everything to comment, obviously. Like, it's not like I could tell you, the best Numenera, the best Call of Cthulhu writers are these. But in D&D, which is what I run and which is what probably a concrete large majority of people who play role-playing games play in some format in the world, I'd say the most exciting stuff is, I review these people on the channel, people like Tony Huso, who has this kind of baroque, high, decadent AD&D aesthetic that goes on with very well-written, easy to parse, easy to like just read from the book and understand what's going on and run at the table modules, and I highly recommend him. And Gabor Lux at EMDT has a bunch of really good stuff in the same vein. I don't know, that there are a lot of interesting authors out there who, if you're into D&D, you can go and find modern authors. I mean, I think I like in terms of, I like more granular techie stuff that is more kind of like, this is these old AD&D systems spun anew. And so Merciless Merchants, Prince Nothing's No Art Punk, things like that suit me more. They will definitely not suit some people who want a much more a lighter experience that allows different things to happen. But I think there is a bunch of stuff going on in that space which is immensely creative and very good at making these 40-year-old games fresh within the same tradition. And there's a Mala thing there, isn't there? Of it, tradition isn't the worship of ashes, but the preservation of fire. Like trying to get the thing that's there to be here, and so you don't want it to be too repetitive. But I think understanding why that stuff was good is important. So yeah, I think that is all my questions. I think. Oh, and one more question: do you think it'd be possible to run an explicitly Christian game of D&D? This is an interesting one. What challenges would it present? Have you ever run a game where Christianity was a factor? On the last one, in an explicit sense, no, because I run D&D in fantasy worlds. For the others, what challenges would it present? Is it possible? I think it's inevitable that if you hold a worldview, you're a Christian, you're a Muslim, you're an atheist, you're a Buddhist, whatever it might be, when you are creating and running a world, because the DM's job is to run a world, not a story. And I think if you want my most kind of aggressively controversial, difficult view on these things is DM's not there to run stories, but to run worlds. If you're running a world, and it frankly applies if you are running a story, but that world is going to reflect you and it's going to reflect things about you. And I think in that sense, every game I run is informed by being a Christian, because the world is what it is. I think in terms of explicit Christian, I guess you could. I mean, does that mean that I'm kind of take it to mean, does that mean that there'd be saints, there'd be, God would do stuff? What and depending on your version of Christianity or particular ideas, I guess that might be what you mean. I think I wouldn't run that, and I think it'd be, for me, based on what I'm interested in, poor sub-creation to do so, because Tolkien didn't, basically, is what I mean, and other people, Gene Wolfe didn't, and Ray Bradbury, wherever his exact beliefs were, didn't. Walter M. Miller didn't, even though it's a sci-fi with monks in it. It's the sub-creation does not rely on open and obvious themes of kind of traditional, this is what Christians believe about the world, but a kind of a weird Baroque twist. And so, yeah, I think I wouldn't. I think the challenge that it presents is the degree to which it'd be hard to know what the challenge was for players. I mean, if you want to have a thing that is about, like, I don't know, martyring communist Romania simulator, you could do that, and that might be quite interesting in a grim way. But I think where we're seeing these as adventurous knights going out into a strange fantasy land, having it be something which is influenced by worldview, but which does not, the results are not being predetermined by worldview. There's something about actual exploration and discovery as part of what D&D is great at, which is different to fiction itself. So in that sense, I think the challenges it present are, it'd be weird to do with that it wasn't cheesy or wasn't obvious what must happen or wasn't over the top. And I think what is instead perhaps for me a better way is to let it seep everywhere, to let it be Lewisian allegory that is everywhere. One last question, because Matthew has come into the chat. Is that up yet? Have I seen? Yes, fine. StreamYard is like you click, and about 8 years later, it shows the comment. I find this with Portrait Fantasy is that I'm clicking, and Abby's talking. I'm like, yeah, one second. Have I seen the Book of the New Sun comic adaptation? I have not. I've seen some art from it. I've seen like pages. When you Google like picture of Severian for whatever reason, like I do every day. But when I've looked for stuff to do with that, I've seen pictures of it or on blog articles. I'm not massively excited by the idea of reading it. Is it good? I don't know. Say in the chat or the comments. But I think there are reasons why that's probably one of his more unadaptable books. And you can adapt weird, unreliable narrators, in the sense you can have a comic when the narrator is crazy or things are strange, I think. But I think it's something where so much the world is, what's appealing about the book is how numinous and strange and beyond my immediate comprehension it is, that possibly, maybe for me, the visualization wouldn't help. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think if someone bought me a copy, I'd read it. I don't think I'd be so outraged that I couldn't have a look at it. But yeah, I think there are other Wolf books that might be more amenable to adaptation. I think Night, as in Wizard Night really could, because what's weird with the narrator and about the world is not, I think, to do with how hard it is to grasp what's happening. The fact that you're trying to unpick this, it's what's strange about the narrator is the narrator's own perceptions of themselves in the world, because Abel is a 12-year-old who gets turned into an adult. So I think an adaptation of that would work quite well. I'm sure you could get away with Book of the Long Sun despite the artifices in the narration. But in that case, just because there is just a plot, and it is a very dramatically constructed novel. I think I've made this point a few times that it reads like it's. I think it's meant to as well read like a play script. It's meant to read like Shakespeare. But yeah, I think Book of the New Sun. I haven't read the comic adaptation, and I don't immediately go like, I need to read that. Anyway, that is rather than like 10 to 20 minutes, which I was expecting. That is more like an hour. So I should probably leave that there and let what I think seems to be many watchers come through. I'm really pleased that lots of people have come in and said hello and asked questions. And if you have any more questions, I did actually. This was from an old kind of after the fact assumptions thing. My friend Abby did once say, I kind of assumed she did. I don't think she had me on Goodreads at the time. She was like, I assume you are like a military history person, and I am. So I will answer that here. I am a military history person. One last freebie there. I read less than I did because I just have other stuff I have to read or need to read. But it looks like we do have one late in the gate question. I have thought about doing a library tour, Dave. Dave asks, have you ever shown all your books? I have thought about it, but the trick for my booktube career, my burgeoning, blossoming booktube career, is that I read books and I think about stuff, and then I just sit down here and make a video, and it doesn't take very long. It might take an hour. Like I have reviews of RPG books which are over an hour. So the whole process can take an hour and a half, 2 hours, once a week or something, for something that long, and maybe a short video another time. But a bookshelf tour, though I think kind of cool, would require tidying stuff. It would require stuff looking good. It would require making sure I had a decent camera, which I'm sure I could. We have a few options for that. Recording it all, editing it all, and so though it is on the list of stuff I should do, I haven't done it. No. I have a bookshelf here which is partly kids' books and encyclopedias. It's partly mysteries and satires, and then there's art books up there, including some really, literally the nicest books in the house. This is the place to go, or some of the nicest books. For instance, here is Hiroshige. That's text. Why is that actually text? This is like, yeah, just lovely. Lovely Japanese print art from the 19th century. And then upstairs is where my sci-fi and fantasy is, and a few other things are upstairs as well. And up in my office is non-fiction, philosophy, theology, things like that. Yeah, thanks, Rodney. Rodney has been around since very early in the channel's history. So, yeah, it's nice to have you, Rodney. And Matthew, take this as a kid recommendation one. They're currently enjoying listening to Little House in the Big Woods, their first Ingalls Wilder book, but they really love The Hobbit, massively love The Hobbit. They have liked the Moomins. They have liked or do like E. Nesbit, so we are nearly at the end of the Samiad trilogy. They liked the Bromeliad, the Gnomes trilogy by Terry Pratchett. The Hobbit is probably the book that they most clearly, obviously enjoyed when we've read family time together. They like King Arthur stories of legends of King Arthur, things like that. And they do like we have read a variety of bande dessin together more recently because they really like watching Tintin. And I do have the Tintin collections, but I want to go out into having individual albums because they're easier for the kids to read. But they've liked reading Blake and Mortimer and Alex and a few others of those recently. And yeah, they're reading kids on the whole, and family reading time, if you've got kids, I think is invaluable. Like it can take effort, but because sometimes we have 3 with a 4th on the way and they're running around screaming and you got to get them sat down. But when you do, and you're then reading The Hobbit or something, or Narnia, which we've read several books of them with, is and they love it and they are just into it, is an irreplaceable experience for me, certainly, and I hope for them as well. On which note, I will leave that there. We're now at an hour. We're overwhelming the internet. We're taking up all the bandwidth. I've got to give some of it back to the elders of the internet. So I will leave it there. And if you have other questions, drop them in the comments afterward. And I will see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.